Can you hear me now? Hopefully you can hear me now. No voice. Can't hear. Okay. Just bear with me. Yay! Okay. I do believe we're up and running with the audio. Let me just tell you, I'm an immigration advisor. I don't profess to have great live streaming capabilities, although I am very much with my trainer wheels on, and I am determined to get this technology sussed. So, okay. Okay, right. I'm going to get going on what is a big and important topic. And I know that out there, lots of people are feeling all sorts of things if on a visa. And if there's one message that I can send out to you all, it's a very large hug, because I think at this time it's so important that we acknowledge and recognize the additional stresses that all of our migrant community are under. When, it's bad enough for those of us that are just having to deal with COVID-19 without having that extra overlay of stress around visa status. So my team and we fully acknowledge what you're all going through, and we're with you all of the way. It's about time, actually, I think, that there was a bit more acknowledgement of the whole migrant situation. There are pockets, but we know that we're in for a bit of a political fist fight with an election coming up, and we'll talk a bit more about all of this as we go through. The second message that I want to give out tonight is that with so much information floating around in the ether, particularly on social media, but also in the general media, I think it's important more than ever to make sure that you get really solid analysis, information and advice about what's going on. I mean, not necessarily from me, but from anybody, because there's so much sort of hyperbole in the media. There's so much misinformation I see being sort of passed around as people sometimes go into super reactive mode as soon as they see something. Yesterday was a case in point, because we had a big announcement, which I'm going to walk you through, hopefully with some calm and with some critique, where you'll be able to see it's not all bad. So that's the second message. Don't panic. When you see something about immigration, don't panic. Get the information, take a step back, seek out information or advice. Before I launch into actually talking about the things that I posted I would talk about, I'm going to also give you a little bit of insight into what it's like to be an immigration advisor at the moment. So I've been going in this profession for a long time. I'm certainly not the one that's been going the longest, but I've been going for 15 years. And in my team also, and they may be out there listening, they threatened me with that. We have a combined amazing set of experience in our office. We've got people who've worked for Immigration New Zealand for more than 19 years. We've got people who are Kiwis with backgrounds in recruitment, HR, and immigration advice. We've got myself, we've got a support team, people who've worked overseas in immigration. So I do think we are an amazing collective pool of knowledge, but not just knowledge, it's experience which counts for so much in this sort of area. So anyway, that's a sort of bit about us. But what I quickly realized when COVID sort of swept over us like a tidal wave, and that tidal wave came really crushing down on us on the 19th of March when the borders closed, I quickly realized that one of the most important duties of an immigration advisor is to serve the migrant community. I mean, we don't exist unless we have you. So we are here to help you, and we it's not just then everybody for themselves. This is a time where we have to pull together. We need to really be one voice. And behind the scenes, there has been an enormous amount of work going on. You may not realize this as individual migrants, but, we have an industry body, which I've always been very involved with. That's the New Zealand Association of Migration and Investment. They represent a large part of our profession. There's also the legal profession. There's also other groupings that we're working with who are organizing around some of the migrant issues. And together we're trying to get traction on some of the areas that we know need attention. And because of the politics involved, there's always going to be tensions around, a lot of this. So it's really complicated stuff. But I'm going to move you through the points that I have prepared for you. And then I see loads of questions coming up, and goodness knows how I'm going to field all of these. But anyway, we'll see what I can do. And if I don't get to answer something, by the way, I will try to do so after the fact. So just bear with me. But I am going to show you something here. So that's me. These are just some of the people that we have to remember hold your futures in their hands. And I'm sure you recognize some of them, but you might not recognize all of them. And the reason I put this slide up actually is because I wanted people to understand that it's no one person and it's no one thing. I think everybody's got this idea that it's all about Jacinda or it's all about the immigration minister. But let's not forget, when we're talking about immigration matters, that at the moment, immigration is actually being directed primarily also by, the Ministry of Health. That's this chappie down here. So, Ministry of Health are the ones advising around the border closure. And they are, therefore, it's not just, for example, Ian Leese-Galloway, immigration minister, who can act on his own. He's got to take into account what the health considerations are. So it is a complex web, and we do need to just have that in the background of our minds. This man over the bottom right, he's probably the one that people least recognise. That's Greg Patchell. He is the head of Immigration New Zealand, and I don't think we've seen him once since the beginning of all of this. So interesting, right? And I guess, actually, if I go back to here, one of my issues around the whole thing that's going on at the moment is that, Jacinda is seen as this fantastic communicator. But Immigration New Zealand have found it much more difficult to actually find their voice. Ian Leese-Galloway has appeared sometimes, but usually reluctantly. And as I say, the leaders of Immigration New Zealand, they will make the odd appearance. But communications, even to advisors, has been scant, and it's one of the things that we've been struggling with. Now, we'll talk about what's being processed at the moment and why, because these are questions that I get a lot. And I need to take myself a little bit out of the frame there. So I guess what's interesting is that everybody seems to think that Immigration New Zealand, being an online organisation largely, or most visas are done online, would have had a fairly seamless transition when we went into lockdown, but that is extremely far from the truth. In fact, we know that their capacity is extremely limited, has been extremely limited, and it's not going to come back to full productivity for quite some time to come. So we got this new list of priorities issued out on the 17th of April, and I sort of prioritized it here for you. They've basically clumped together 4 new sets of priorities. So at the top would be anything to do with COVID, but anything non-COVID anything that's not humanitarian, anything that's not essential work is actually relegated down to third priority, and residence applications are fourth priority. And I've put there that they do have a caveat that any individual case can be prioritized if warranted. But if I can just speak to this for a moment, to what it actually really all means. It means that at the moment, if you are a health worker, for example, you will find probably that you get better treatment now than you did before COVID. Things are moving really quickly for you if you're in that area of health. If you are in other kinds of work that's considered really essential, that might be something super technical, super needed to keep the country moving during these times, then you might also get a bit of red carpet treatment. If you are in the humanitarian area that's classified, for example, as including domestic violence, those cases are moving quickly. There are case officers who are focused on these things, but everything else is very much down the list. So if you are, for example, just an ordinary work visa applicant, and you are sitting there in a queue, you could be waiting quite some time because you're going to be further down that priority list. The one I think that's worrying to people is that residence. I keep getting asked, when is my residence application going to move? And basically, the residence applications are they're at the bottom of the pile. They are paper for the most part. SMCs, so that's skilled migrant, or residents from work, they're really not dealing with those at the moment. So what else is moving would be partnership. They're in the sort of second tier. So anybody who's partnership, that is possible to be moving. And in fact, we've seen some partnership visas issued last week and this. So partnership, yeah, that's still a viable thing. Anything COVID, viable. Anything non-COVID, less viable, but will start to pick up as things move on. Why is it that this is going on? And like I say, it's a serious lack of capacity. I think people find this surprising, but all branches of Immigration New Zealand are actually still closed. We think the Henderson branch is about to open, but when it opens, it will only be allowed to open at 20% capacity in level 3. It will move to 50% capacity at level 2. So if you can imagine what that means, 50% capacity means that your teams can only be there on a rotational basis. So even when we get back to level 2, it will actually still completely, it won't be back to normal by any stretch. And not only will it not be at normal capacity, but they're going to have these large backlogs of cases to deal with. So, we will see the processing times push out for non-COVID cases. There's no news at all of when the overseas branches will open. Many of you may know that we've got branches still in Beijing. The Beijing branch hasn't been open since the end of January. So all those staff have been off work for over 3 months now. It's quite amazing to think. The Pacific branches are closed. The Mumbai branch is also closed, and because India hasn't got its numbers under control, that could be going on for quite some time. So the other thing that's been hampering Immigration New Zealand is the fact that they really don't have the capacity to work from home that we might have imagined. And I guess questions are being asked of this, but they will certainly be asked once things sort of get back to normal, because really it's come down to who has got a laptop, sometimes what kind of laptop, what model of laptop. We've been told that, when we went into lockdown level 4, there were really only about 300 out of a staff of around 2,000 that were able to actually access anything from home. So that is why lots of things just completely went on ice. And the ones that were able to get online were put strictly onto COVID-19 type cases. So those sort of health workers, other essential workers, nothing else really was, or domestic violence. Those were pretty much the only things. So yeah, it's unfortunate because we really would like to be able to report that things are going to be, moving quickly, but they will not in a lot of areas. And then we come to this issue of the border closure. So I'm going to just move myself. Actually, I'll take myself away so you can see. Right, the border. This is a subject very dear to my particular heart because as soon as they shut the border, I could see very quickly that this was going to turn into a really gnarly area. First of all, of course, the first duty of New Zealand was to try to get its citizens home. Citizens and then residents and permanent residents. And a large number of those have come home and have been going through the 2-week mandatory quarantine up in various hotels in Auckland. There's about 18 hotels. And I have had people sending me photos from quarantine. But the biggest problem are for those citizens or residents who are stuck still in places where now they really cannot get back because there's a lack of flights or too much red tape around flights. I just found out about a whole load of flights that were due to be coming from South Africa that are actually being cancelled as we speak. So there's this issue. There are immigration issues and then practical flight issues, which are making navigation of the closure of the border extremely difficult. And out there, I know that there are groups of people on Facebook from various countries gathering together, trying to work out how on earth to get back to New Zealand. And I think the most difficult cases are those for people whose lives were here, whose lives are here, you could say. They not were here, but are here. People, I've been talking to people who literally, they have their house here, they have their car here, they've got their loans here, their bank accounts, their pets and children's schooling. Some of them, half the family is offshore, half are here. Some are completely caught out offshore and through no fault of their own because they simply happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the border came down so quickly that even if you were watching what was going on and had your ear to the ground, it was just physically impossible to get flights out in time. And that's really worrying. Those people are, obviously the legal situation is that citizens, residents, permanent residents, and even Aussies who have been living in New Zealand do have the right to come into New Zealand, even though the border is shut. But for everybody else, it's a question of applying case by case. And what Immigration New Zealand did very quickly, and I do commend them for the speed at which they moved to do this, but there are ongoing problems with it. They introduced a new expression of interest process, whereby somebody who's stuck offshore can apply to be able to come onshore without paying any fee, which is great. But as you'll see from my slide, the success rate is still really, really low. In fact, it's sort of getting lower because the number of people applying has increased, and many of those are repeat applications. So last week, there were already over 5,500 expressions of interest that had been made through the online process. And this is where it gets difficult. So if you fall under the humanitarian category, and that typically the humanitarian category would be, say, someone who's got a work visa, who is stuck offshore, but is not considered to be an essential worker, but whose life is in New Zealand. And there are a lot of you out there, I know. The success rate for the humanitarian category is only 4%. We've been pretty much told, you have to have, it's a relative dying in New Zealand, or it has to be a life or death kind of situation. And that's because in the actual wording of the instructions that they wrote, they talk about not only humanitarian, but exceptional humanitarian circumstances. And it's always, we know as advisors, when you've got a situation where lots of people are in the same kind of situation, it's actually very difficult to prove exceptional. And that's why that number's so low. But even more worrying to me was the fact that in the area of essential workers, it's only 1%, the success rate. And that was information given to us last week. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, even though this is not exclusively about the border. I will cover the border in a session tomorrow in more depth. But the thing with an essential worker is that there's just been no clarity about what an essential worker really is. It's a classic case where immigration wrote instructions on the hoof and they left all these very grey areas. So, I always say it's kind of what's not on the packet. So on the packet, they said if you're an essential worker, you could apply to get in, and it gave the expectation that you would be approved. But in the fine print, it's all about discretion. And in reality, unless you have the support of your lead agency, and I know people will ask me what the heck that means, you're unlikely to get approval, at least at the current time. A lead agency is the ministry responsible for the profession that you are in. So, for example, if you are in farming, your lead agency would be the MPI, or Ministry of Primary Industries. If you are a teacher, it would be the Ministry of Education. If you're in transport, it would be the Ministry of Transport. If you're in construction, it's MB, and so on and so forth. And the biggest issue there is that they said, you need the lead agency to support you, but then they didn't actually come up with any system for getting lead agency support. So we're having to invent that. And I've been experimenting and pushing and prodding and poking and trying to get inroads into these processes to see how far we can go. But look, suffice to say that out there, and if you're not offshore, I want you all to think about the people who are stuck offshore, because it could have been any one of us. And the people who are offshore, have their lives here. Many are having to live pretty much out of the suitcases that they've got, without access to the necessities of life, for now what's becoming quite a prolonged and worrisome period. Some of them will have people, jobs where the employer is saying, I can only hang on for so long. So that's adding a whole extra layer of stress. So I can't give you any closure on this, because this is a huge piece of work that is ongoing, and it is so obviously political on so many levels, with so many fingers in the pie. And even if you get the exception, you do still have to get an actual flight, which that's got its own issues, because it's just simply, while there's not many commercial flights going, and those that are going might, for example, go through Australia, where you have very long waits, and you've got to go through then Australian transit and quarantine exception clearances and so forth. But we will keep up the raising of awareness, the media. We will continue to put pressure on to make sure your voice is heard, because your voice is so important. I think the average Kiwi, if they actually really took the time and understood what you're going through, would also feel supportive, because the average Kiwi is a caring person, is someone who wants to do the right thing. I think there's a danger that the media or the politics will get in the way, and will not allow that kind of compassion to come through. But we do have a compassionate Prime Minister, theoretically, so we'll keep up the pressure. I'll move on from border to something that happened yesterday. So yesterday we had a new bill introduced into Parliament, and it's a very significant piece of legislation. That's the title there. It brings in 8 new very important powers. It's going to be law within the next 2 weeks, which will be an extremely fast piece of legislation. I've spent some of today listening to MPs talking about this because this bill is already moving through its readings. And one of the MPs mentioned that a piece of legislation went through last week so quickly that even the MP that had introduced it didn't seem to be aware. I find that really amazing. But anyway, this will be very fast. And when things are fast, there's always a concern that there could be things that are missed. But our industries are looking at this very closely, critiquing it. And there is a level of cautious support because, and I'll explain why, because the 8 new powers will allow Immigration New Zealand to deal with cases en masse rather than case by case. And we've had some tasters of this already because, for example, people who are stuck in New Zealand who had visas expiring before the 9th of July have already, without charge, had their visas extended until the 25th of September. And I mean, that's really helpful to the migrant community. And we want to see more of that. We want to see this bill, when it becomes law, used to good effect, not bad. The message that the government's giving is all about it being used for the good, not for the detriment of migrants. So we will be holding them to account on that. I mean, examples of what they might do, for example, they could extend again a whole class of visas. They could extend the travel conditions that are placed on people's visas who are stuck offshore, because there's a lot of people who've got visas offshore who were supposed to come into New Zealand by a certain date and they can't. And we are hoping, for example, that they would say, right, all of those have another X amount of time to be able to get into New Zealand. These would be great ways for them to use this new law. I'm going to just move. I'll come back to this, or maybe not actually. Let's have a look. This may be a little bit small, but hopefully if you can make it big screen for you. And I'm not going to get too detailed about it, but in essence, what it sets out are the 8 new powers. On the very right-hand side, it does give you some examples of how they might be used. And in the second column, they also talk about who's going to have the power to actually make the decision to exercise these powers. So one thing I want to just explain, because I can see in social media people don't understand this, is that it's not that this law comes into effect on the 15th of May and then immediately on the 15th of May, a whole load of things change immediately for visa holders. What the 15th of May will bring, or whatever date eventually it gets passed, they will then have to go, right, okay, what are we going to do? And I'm sure they're working on those things now ahead of time because they'll anticipate that it's going to be passed. But if they want to, for example, vary a whole load of conditions on visas, then the minister, Ian Lee-Scalloway, will need to pass what's called a special direction. If you look in the second column, you'll see special direction, special direction, special direction, etc. So those are all decisions that he will need to make to actually implement these powers. The only one, and this is very important, people are really worrying about all of this and what it all means, but the one to watch out for, I think, for people who are trying to get residence, for example, will be number 7, because there it talks about the power to suspend the ability to make an application for visas or submit expressions of interest in applying for visas by classes of people. So those words suspend, that because that power is quite far-reaching, it's not just Ian Lee Scalloway who has to make that decision. That will be an order in council. That's something that goes higher. It goes to cabinet. And it's actually something that can only be done for 3 months at a time if you look on the other column. So, my team, we were analysing all of this morning, and we don't know how they're going to use these. So, nobody at the moment could tell you. We are all pundits. We're all working out what they might do, where's the likely usage of it. But they do give some examples of it. So that, and actually, if I go back to my PowerPoint for you, I have done a little bit of color coding because I do want people to see that it's not all negative stuff. It is the purple are good things. They're nice. They're the nice words: varying, extending, granting, waiving. Those are enabling provisions. I love waiving any regulatory requirements for certain classes of application. They might say, okay, well, we'll waive the need to have original documents for a residence application or things like that. These are enabling provisions. They could vary the conditions for a whole class of resident class visa holders. They might say, all of you resident class visa holders who are supposed to come into New Zealand by a certain date, your date's extended, or if you're stuck offshore and you're meant to be getting your permanent residence, maybe we'll extend it there. I don't know, but there are some good enabling provisions here. The ones that we have to watch out for are the imposing, cancelling, suspending, revoking provisions, and these are the ones that cause the jitters among the migrant community. Are they going to cancel my visa? Are they going to deport me? Are they going to, if I'm in a residence application, is it somehow going to take that application away? What we have to go back to are the basic principles that we've been sold, that these provisions will be used to enable and to help the migrant community for the most part. I myself think there will be some things that we really need to watch out for. I absolutely think that we will see, I'll go back. For example, under the suspension, I do think they will suspend EOIs for skilled migrant category. It's quite possible that they'll do that. We are already so far behind. They had 11,500 skilled migrant and residents from work applications in a queue even before COVID. So, I can totally imagine that they would say, we just can't cope. Let's suspend the ability to keep putting in EOIs. We haven't even had an EOI pool draw since before COVID either. It was at the beginning of March that we saw the last one. So, they might just say, well, we're just going to put a hold on residents. That doesn't mean that they can do it indefinitely, because as we have seen, they can only do it for 3 months. And besides which, they do have to do it. The whole thing is premised on being COVID-19 related. It's to deal with the impacts of COVID-19. This is not meant to be a way to just clear out the whole skilled migrant category, for example, because they want to make some kind of sweeping policy change. It's not designed to be that. It's not to say that if they had an ulterior motive, they wouldn't use it, but that's got to be watched and scrutinized. And the opportunity there is to, that there has to be an order in council to suspend anything. Where I think people could also benefit from this scheme is, for example, if we know that out there's a lot of you that may have had your hours reduced or your pay reduced, but below a threshold required for your visa. And what we have been asking for is that people's visa conditions could be varied for a period of time to allow for some relaxation of that. So I'm really hoping that they will use this to good effect and to also help manage this absolute overload that they've got, so that they can get on with the really good work in hand. So, yeah, we'll come to the questions in a bit. What would I say to people who have an existing application already lodged, given the scheme of things? Well, I would say that if you've got a residence application lodged, that under these provisions, they can't actually take that away from you. They should continue to process you under the instructions that you actually applied under. And so you will experience delays, but if you've already applied for residence, then it should not be, it shouldn't be a problem. You will have a delay if you are just at the EOI stage, for example, and they're just not pulling you out of the pool. But if, for people, I've had calls from people who are 11 months into their residence application or almost at finishing point of a residence application, and those ought to continue, but we know that they are fourth priority. The work visas, if you've already lodged a work visa, again, it will be done according to the priority lists. So it will all be, if you've got an application in, they really ought to decide it as per that priority list. So if you are an essential health worker or an essential other worker, you should get precedence over any other workers. And you have to just be aware of the priority list. So there will be delays, significant delays, but people have asked me this: could they make my employer, for example, re-advertise my job? And the reality is that if you've already lodged a work visa based on evidence of advertising where it was shown that there was no Kiwi, immigration has assured us, albeit verbally, that they will apply the instructions as per their duty at the time when you lodged your application. But what I think we will see a lot of is a strict lens around the labour market testing. I think they will scrutinise that labour market testing to the nth degree. And I also think they will start looking at sustainability with a greater focus. And this is not surprising. They are going to want to protect New Zealand jobs. Now, in our office, for example, with labour market tests and sustainability, we've always had a pretty stringent approach. We look around the corners. We're hard on employers. When employers say to us, "There's no Kiwi to do this job," we actually delve and dig, and we ask the sorts of questions that we know a picky immigration officer could ask. I would say that prior to COVID, what we were seeing was a fairly light touch on the labour market test sometimes, so that even though we might be prepared for them to dig, they actually didn't always dig. I think those days will be gone. So I think people who are in labour market tested work visas will need to be prepared to the employers will need to be prepared to justify that there really wasn't a Kiwi available. And obviously, if I'm talking about existing applications, as we move forward, if you've got a new application that you need to lodge, that's where it's going to get probably even gnarlier, because of course the employers have to advertise now in a whole new labour market. And we have to be real. There will be huge areas of work where it will no longer be possible to justify that there's New Zealander to do the work. I mean, hospitality, tourism, the industries servicing those, clearly there will be people needing to be redeployed. It's not rocket science to know that if a job could be done, for example, by somebody who's just been made redundant from Air New Zealand, then no work visa is going to be issued. Immigration advisors will debate till the cows come home exactly what areas of work will survive the new labour market, and it is highly speculative. Again, we'll talk a bit more about that. But just sticking on the sustainability point, what I'm talking about is that in existing instructions, even though you may not know it, it already says that any job must be sustainable. So where you've had a complete disruption to your labor market and businesses have had to claim, the subsidy, where businesses may be facing turbulent times, Immigration New Zealand could get sticky around those issues. And that's an area where I also foresee that whether for existing work visa applicants or new work visa applicants, you're going to need to really be prepared. It's not to say that a business that's having a knock is not a sustainable business. It's that business is going to have to show to Immigration New Zealand proactively how that employment is likely to be sustainable. And so I think that's an area that we are going to be seeing a lot more of. It has reared its head in the past, it comes and goes, but now it will be centre front. So what do migrants need? Well, what do you need to worry about, and what don't you need to worry about? So I thought in the spirit of, again, trying to be balanced, and there are positives and there are negatives in all of this, but I mean, the overall message has been positive, that there is a recognition of a need to look after our migrants. Let's pause and just actually think about what New Zealand has done, because New Zealand has given all temporary migrants access to the wage subsidy. They haven't given access to other kinds of benefits, which is an issue that is very contentious. But the wage subsidy has been available to people who are on temporary visas, whether they be onshore or offshore. So that's been a pretty major recognition of the need to look after migrant workers. There are MPs who are talking about, particularly say Queenstown, where there's such a huge migrant labour force that's made their home there and been working in tourism and hospitality and are currently receiving food parcels. And I think there is a big recognition, and people understand that need to look after them. I wonder if they will use the new powers to perhaps grant some short-term visa rights for people in those positions, maybe to ease up and help them. Because what's really interesting is it's not in New Zealand's interest to actually have people onshore who can't find work and can't support themselves, who are destitute. So whilst also trying to balance that with protecting New Zealand jobs, they do need to actually make sure that our migrant labour force, even if it's just to allow them to get money to get home, have the ability to do that and can leave New Zealand lawfully. I think that's very, very important. Where I think there are still concerns around just how far this kind approach is going to go is, we still don't have a firm signal that they will relax around hours and pay rates. I wish they would come out and do that. I'm hoping that's one of the first things that Ian Lees-Galloway signals as soon as he gets these powers, that for, let's say, a period of 3 months, people do not have to meet the hours or the pay conditions on their visas. But we don't have assurances of that. What we've been doing is working with those clients of ours who have, come to us saying, my employer wants to reduce my hours or my pay rate. We've actually been salvaging. I think we've managed to salvage actually pretty much all of them in terms of keeping out of breach. If people are still being employed but they're having to reduce hours or pay, we've jiggled around the calculations so that people do it in such a way as to remain in compliance, because we don't have assurance that they can be out of compliance. There obviously will be cases where that's not possible, and there will be cases where people have lost their job entirely. If experiencing loss of a job, then what we have been told is that you won't be deported. Okay, I've had that from the head of compliance, and he said, look, they're not going to be deporting people who lose a job. They're going to be deporting people who commit crimes in this period, but they understand that people are going to lose their jobs, so they won't be acting, as long as you do the right thing and you don't over stay, a reasonable period looking for a job, and to be able to stay any longer after we come perhaps to level 2 or once flights start to open up again, you definitely would need to think about, you're going to have another job. It's not going to be a question where they say, okay, you've lost your job, therefore you can still claim points for your skilled migrant residence application, or you can still have a work visa. I don't think it will work like that. I think there will be some tolerance for a limited period of time. And I've also signalled here that thing that people still are worrying about are the border restrictions, of course, where that's unresolved. So we have to continue to fight that. There's a bit of repetition there. So let's just move on. Definitely want to signal as well that you do not need to worry if you have an existing residence application and your job is secure. As I said, I don't think they're going to cancel, just wipe off the board all the skilled migrant applications or the residents from work that have gone in. That's not in the vision of that new bill. If you do have a means to reduce your hours or pay in a way that remains compliant, and perhaps I should have said, obviously, you might be on 40 hours. Well, you can go back to 30 hours without being out of compliance. If you're on $30 an hour, you can agree to go back to 25 or 25.50, whatever the threshold was when you applied for your residence. So, you can always talk to an advisor about how to sort of manage that. But if you're in those positions, you really shouldn't be worrying. And as I say, there's no risk of compliance. I'll finish before I take the questions on what does the future hold. And I've put a crystal ball there because nobody knows. There's so much uncertainty. And it's a bit like asking the economists none of the economists agree what the unemployment rate's actually going to be like. Is it going to be 6%, 10%, 15%, or 20%? How much will housing prices come down? No, nobody can tell you. And Tony Alexander, who's the one of New Zealand's leading economists, has said that pretty much every single forecast made after the GFC was wrong. So it's a bit like having to predict the weather. But I think we can obviously extrapolate some things that we need to focus on. The opening of the border is clearly a huge thing for us. My own view on that is that we obviously, I believe we should be letting our temporary migrants back in, provided you have ongoing work. If you've got a work visa and if your life is here, you should be allowed to come back and resume life. I don't think any Kiwi would want, well, a reasonable Kiwi would not want to take your job from you, knowing that your life was destroyed by being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. I have a fundamental belief system around that. If you want to just come in for a visit or to take up a job that, or apply for a job now, a brand new job, then you really are going to just have to wait until the border opens. And there's, we've seen already that they are wanting to rush to open the border with Australia. There's so much pressure to open the border with Australia. And it will be so interesting to see how they manage that we know that they're already working at the airports on coming up with a system that would allow us to form a bubble with Australia without having to do quarantine. That's propelled particularly by the tourism industry that wants desperately to get those tourists from Australia coming back for the ski season, etc. And that will be a litmus test, I reckon, for how they will handle the border and open it up, perhaps slowly, to other sets of people. And that's where, if we go back to the bill that's gone into Parliament, remember that they're going to have the power to make decisions about whole groups of, or whole classes of visas. And again, if I rewind and go back to pre-March 19th, they already did this. They already said, for example, we're closing the border to China, only China, people from mainland China. Then they closed the border to Iran before they closed the border generally, and they might reopen it up in sections. And of course, we can see where we think they're going to open up to. South Korea has been touted. The countries effectively that have got good numbers, maybe there'll be a staged reopening. The other people that will put pressure hugely on the border reopening will be the education institutions. Well, they already are. This week in the papers, I saw articles asking for the border to open for July for students, so that they could come in and quarantine in university accommodation. Jacinda has come back saying, well, no, it's not likely that we'll open the borders for quite some time. But let's see. We don't know what these competing pressures will be. Most people in the education sector are predicting a February reset for international education, and that students will be encouraged to start New Zealand courses online in July. The future also holds for us an election. So on top of everything else that we're dealing with, we are going to see that as things move towards an election, immigration again is a likely football. There will be strict protection around Kiwi jobs. But, and this is the question that comes up a lot, because people say, well, is there going to be any immigration possible to New Zealand in the future? Or is it just going to completely close down and become insular? And, common sense says that with tourism, retail, hospitality, administration type things, that those will be the main casualties, where for a long time it's likely that there'll be pushback by the government to allow the sort of reliance on migrant labour that we've had. But there will clearly be lots of areas of work that are going to survive this readjusted, realigned labour market. I mean, an airline steward or stewardess cannot suddenly become an electrician or a plumber or an engineer or an IT infrastructure, professional. Those industries are still going to need migrant labour. We don't turn out enough of those people in New Zealand. I mean, we might start really severely learning the lesson that we need to, and we may have gained some Kiwis who've come home from places like the UK, USA, etc., where they may have felt now that New Zealand is a better place to be. But I definitely think that in the longer term, or short, medium, long, it's a movable feast, but that there will be absolute need for migrant labour, but it'll just become a lot more selective, and we're going to have to keep our ears firmly to the ground. I mean, I've been talking to lots of recruiters over the last month, and you get a very mixed bag of reactions. They will say things like, that there might be a shortish period now between now and Christmas where lots of businesses are really busy and in catch-up mode. They had orders before lockdown and they're going to go back into power mode, and they need workers. It may then slow again around Christmas time and into the new year. There might be a more cautious market. We don't know how much of a recession we're going to see. So, this is about getting sensible feedback, not listening to the wrong sources of information. I do think sometimes there's a tendency to brush some of this a bit under the carpet. Even in the trades, I mean, it's not clear cut what trades are going to need people when, because there will be some tradesies who, for example, may have been servicing hotels which are now going to be closed for a period. So there is going to be readjustment. So for me, it's about, there's going to be lots of mixed positives, negatives, realignment. There'll be some completely new areas of business that have come out. We've already seen that the adaptation of private enterprise is so amazing in times of crisis, how businesses have suddenly converted to being online. They're using new technologies. There's new jobs being created. I went on Seek today, and you can do a search on Seek, by the way, of jobs listed in the last however long. You can say in the last 7 days, and you'll be amazed at how many jobs that are actually being listed. They will be in those niche and higher skilled areas for the most part, and some of them will absolutely not look at migrants for quite some time unless they're really pushed. But there will be others who will. So you need to just be having sensible conversations with your advisors around which areas are going to move when. The other things that I can see coming up on the horizon, we've been told that all those plans the government had to go ahead with employer accreditation and other changes, for example, they were going to make a change that would be really helpful for migrants in the essential skills area, because they were going to say that everyone who's earning 25.50, regardless of your ANSCO occupation, would now be regarded as mid-skilled and could therefore not only move from being on a 1-year work visa with no family accompanying, but you could move to a 3-year visa. That was going to be a major change. And we are told that those are still on the cards. Supposedly they were going to be by the middle of the year. Whether they still get there, we don't know. But we've been told that they still plan to do that. So that would be great. I think we will see some reduction in the numbers in the SMCQ if jobs fall away. So that 11,500 queue could contract somewhat if people have lost their jobs and then cannot proceed with their skilled migrant or residence from work application. But I urge people in that situation to also seek advice, because it depends what stage you're at. If you're still in the queue, you definitely are going to need to inform immigration. If you don't inform immigration, you could be pinged for concealing relevant information about your application, and that can have very serious consequences, and it can lead to taking away appeal rights and so forth. So you really need to get good advice if you're in that situation. Some people will benefit from that, in that the queue will contract, possibly, maybe, because, if someone's been invited to apply, for example, but hasn't yet applied, then that's a place that becomes available. We will see suspension of classes of visa applications. I'm absolutely convinced. I think they'll say, look, don't bother applying for a visitor visa for the next period. What's the point if you can't get in? I think they will stop us from putting in some skilled migrant residence applications for maybe a period of up to 3 months. And in the long term, perhaps post-election, I think we're going to see a possible reset on long-term immigration policies that have nothing to do with COVID-19. They will review the policies in the long term. So my message would be that if you are in a position to apply now before they suspend anything, go ahead and do it. If you're sitting on in a situation where you need to renew a work visa application, you need to get on and do it. If you want to apply for your skilled migrant residence, go ahead and do it. Don't wait, because we don't know what those future changes could hold. And I thought I'd leave on this, because this was where we were at before COVID. That's a very hefty number, so let's not lose sight of that. New Zealand has relied on migrant labour for a very long time, and particularly in those larger businesses. If you look at this chart here, shows you that it's the larger businesses that have 81% need for migrant labour, effectively, or shortages. They have shortages. So even with the New Zealanders who lose their jobs, there still will be shortages. And this was more a retrospective, because this is quite sad. This was the closure of a restaurant in Dunedin long before we had COVID, because they couldn't get enough staff. And we may see a return to that at some point in the future. I'm just going to skip those slides to here because, what I just wanted to finish on from my side is the fact that, how we can help you is by giving you solid, experienced, licensed advice, being really good at problem solving and thinking laterally, and also having that big picture view, not just sort of directly what's in front of us, giving you realistic labour market information and being careful and ethical when we do so. So we're not going to give you a sugar-coated view of the world. We are literally going to, tell you things as they are and look at worst case scenarios, try and give you A, B, C strategies and so forth. Now, I really have finished my presentation. It did take a long time. I'm sorry. I'm going to start just taking some of these questions. Let's just have a look. I'm sort of going backwards, actually. And I'm a bit new to putting these up on the slides. Let's let me just do this for you. Come back to myself. Hold on one moment. There we are. Let me just see. Oh, here we are. So Jacko, I'm in NZ, the wife and kids stuck offshore. I'm so sorry about this, Jacko. Is there some motivation we can lodge to get them here? I have filled a partnership and student visas border control question. Okay. So what I'm getting is that you've already filled out one of these EOIs. I don't know what the result of that is, whether you've been declined, but so it all depends on how long your wife and kids have been in New Zealand, living in New Zealand prior to being stuck offshore. If they can show that they were ordinarily resident in New Zealand before they went offshore, then, and if they've got temporary visas as your dependents, then you could actually tick a box and you could get the exception to travel, for them to travel. But if they've never been in New Zealand before and they were just due to join you, or if they had been in New Zealand just for a shortish period of time, under 6 months, by the looks from what the way immigration is interpreting this all, then they won't get approved under the partnership category. That's just from experience of doing these. And they would have to make out a humanitarian case, where we know at the moment it's 4%. And that's because there needs to be a much higher political ministerial steer to release you from your sufferings. There needs to be a steer, and that's what we are lobbying for at the moment, to say that people in your situation need to be reunited. There is a humanitarian element, and New Zealand also has obligations under international law not to separate families. So Jacko or Yako, by all means, I mean, the one thing about, I mean, I don't know your full circumstance, so you would need to tell me, and maybe you can contact me offline. But there is nothing, of course, to stop you making multiple expression of interests applications, because they've set it up in that way. They can't stop you, and it's free. But I have seen emails where they're saying, please don't bother applying again, which I find actually very cruel, because you've got the right to keep applying, but theoretically, I mean, unless you've got something new to add, or you can find some new aspect, then you're not going to stand much of a chance. But I'm more than happy to guide. You could join one of those groups if you're not already a member, the South African Stuck offshore groups, because they're collating all the information. Maybe you're already there. Carla says, my husband, the main applicant, submitted his essential skills visa application in early March. When will INZ start processing these again? He is not an essential worker for COVID. So, Carla, with that, the answer is we don't know, because he would come under third priority. Third priority is for all other work visas onshore. And therefore, I think you're going to have to wait some time. And we literally can't give you that answer, because we ourselves don't know. We just know there's going to be delays. In normal times, it would have been under a month. With having lost a month and then having only 20% load on the floor and then 50% load, you are going to likely need to wait some time. However, if there are some reasons for requesting expedition, don't forget that it does say that there, the instructions, this priority list, does not prevent a case officer from giving urgency if urgency is warranted. So, I mean, I don't know your circumstances, but if you think you've got something compelling about your situation, then, compelling might be, I've got a job offer to work on a farm that needs me to start for the calving season. Otherwise, New Zealanders are not going to get their milk, for example. Harpreet. Hi, Harpreet. My partner got a visitor visa on the basis of partnership, and the last date to enter is end of May. Right. Okay, yes. Well, you'll be one of hundreds, if not thousands, asking that same question. And we are waiting. Okay, so as I said before, the minister now will have the power, absolutely, to say, for example, I'm going to extend all those first entry dates for people who've got partnership visas. And I would absolutely expect him to do that. I think that's a very obvious thing. It will relieve Immigration New Zealand of the work of having to process those one by one. And it will relieve them of the burden of having to actually make people reapply for visas. That's just going to cause even more chaos. So I'm optimistic about that one. The only problem is we do have to watch the dates, because what I'm a little bit concerned about myself is whether they would do it with retroactive effect. Would they say your first entry date's already expired, therefore we can't vary that anymore because we've got nothing left to extend, or what? So that's something where, Harpreet, we ourselves are asking those questions. What I would suggest is that before the expiry of those visa conditions, you get in touch with your advisor or whoever to make sure what the most current information is, because in normal circumstances you'd have to put in a paper application for a variation of conditions, but that's exactly what I think they're going to try to avoid. So I'm pretty optimistic, but I can't give you a guarantee. Prachith, what will happen to the open work visas? Interesting question. So I don't think anything will happen to open work visas. I think the government is, theoretically, the power is there to suspend whole classes of visa conditions and so forth. But there hasn't been any talk of that. I think it's just something that we have to wear. You can only have an open work visa generally if you're either the partner of someone, or if you've studied at a certain level and you have an open post-study work visa. And I think if you've already been granted that, they would be hard-pressed not to honour that. That's my view. Oh gosh, there's just so many of you. Right. It's quite nice, though, that they come up. I don't know what. There seem to be some adverts coming up as well. Right, let me try and thrash through some of these. Yangala. Any information on partnership visas which are lodged already and waiting for the decisions, will these be put up on hold again? Okay, so no, actually partnership visas are moving. Okay, I know in my office we've just had a bit of a rash of partnership visas come through. I saw some come through today, and you are absolutely up in the pecking order in terms of these priorities after the whole COVID thing, all the COVID, the health workers and everything. You work and visitor visas based on partnership get second priority. Okay, so yeah, you can expect things to move. I think they'll obviously move those, or they should move those for people who are already onshore rather than those offshore, because if you're offshore, there's not much point granting you a visa until you can actually travel. So we would hope that they'd be a bit sensible about that. Hope that answers that. Andrew, applied for my work visa 11 March. Well, that was my birthday. Essential worker. Employer have requested for visa to be expedited, but no joy, expedited. Okay, so yeah. Well, this is where one person's essential worker is not necessarily the next person's essential worker. Andrew, I don't know what your job is, but they are only, it's interesting because, really they should start to move you if you are a designated essential worker. That's what their priority queue says. But I suspect it's a bit like the border closure, where they'll have their own ideas about essential and essential. There'll be a pecking order. Some people are more essential than others. You may need to wait your turn. If you go into the normal turn of things, you would be third priority. Whereas if they think you are really essential, you should be first priority. What is considered an essential worker? Yes. Okay, well, that's like asking someone what do you think success means? Because honestly, this has been the biggest, one of the grayer areas in the whole thing. And I wish I could tell you what an essential worker is. We were given a list of essential workers during level 4. There was actually a published list, and it included people in health, but it included people in supermarkets. Basically, those businesses that were operational during level 4 were supposedly essential workers. But what we find in reality is that they don't apply that broadly. So that's a watch this space. I'm going to be personally pushing more to find out in this new world, now that they're starting to open up again, what really is an essential worker. And I will publish more information about that as it comes. Mohammed says, I'm working under a talent accredited employer visa, planning to apply for residency in October. Will this residency applicability impact to delay? Right. Oh, okay. So, well, what could happen, Mohammed, is that they use the new powers to say that nobody can apply for residence for 3 months. And if you happen to be caught up in that time, you will have to wait, and you therefore will need to possibly renew your talent visa. The good news for you actually is that, and people often don't realize this, that there is a provision. Actually, it's going to be interesting how that plays out. There is an instruction that says normally you can apply for a talent visa even at the old salary rate if you have applied for residence. And I would be suggesting that immigration should apply that if you have been prevented from applying for residence but were eligible. You'd have to get an exception to instructions to do that. But yeah, I mean, if they haven't suspended, or if they have suspended but the suspension 3-month period is over, you'll be able to apply. Yeah. So that's a bit of a watch and see, like most things. Shiguang, I have submitted my resident visa 17 months ago. Haven't been allocated a case officer. How long do I think it will take? Okay, well, again, crystal ball gazing. We know that you're 4th priority. You were probably on the brink of being allocated a case officer. And we think that even though 4th priority, that the skilled migrant residence team will have to start processing some skilled migrant residence applications when they get back to work. The question is, when will they get back to work, and how many of them will get back to work? And those are all things that Immigration New Zealand has not yet been able to confirm to us. Okay, so and that's the team that just does not have access to any of its cases at all, but from home. So if they are working from home, they can't see your file. It's paper and it's not scanned in. Sorry, so it's a waiting game. You could be in for a wait. Julia, I have an SMC. Same thing. Well, no, 11 months ago. Can I also submit a partnership residency visa, as SMC is going too slowly? Actually, immigration always says you shouldn't have 2 visa applications going at the same time. But it's a really good question. You might need to think about that one. You could actually think about going down the partnership route. It might actually prove to be faster for you, but I would never advise someone to do that until they've had all their partnership evidence actually properly analysed to see if that's more viable for you. Yeah. And there are also obviously some implications as well around risk factors that you need to take into account, because if you go down the partnership route, you really have to make sure that your partnership is going to last the distance as well. And some people prefer to stick with SMC because they can, then they're not tied. They don't chew up one of their rights. I think your case needs a bit of individual consideration, but yeah, could be the way to go. I only know this person as the Frogs, Biff, so I don't know your name, sorry. Partner was abroad, visa extensions were granted. Partner was abroad on visa extension. Is there any way to apply for an extension or argue for one via the travel request EOIs? That doesn't give me enough information to fully answer your question, I'm afraid, because I'd need to know whether your partner... first of all, I need to know your status. Are you a temporary visa holder or are you a resident visa holder? And then I'd need to know if your partner was living here or not. So I'm sorry, there's a few variables there. If your partner had just been granted a first-time visa and not travelled in, they might benefit from the minister extending those first entry dates. Medical centres closed. Oh, this is an easy one, thank goodness, given the time of night. I'm in an NZ but can't apply. This comes up a lot. You can absolutely apply without your medical if you're unable to get a medical. We've been told. So what you do is if you're, for example, applying online, you have to you'll have to put in a letter explaining that you have not been able to get a medical, but you will be expected, obviously, to get a medical as soon as you possibly can. The same applies to police clearance certificates. You're expected to get those ones that you can get, but not those that you can't. So that's been made very clear. Essential work visa holders tied with an employer who's been made redundant. Okay, so for you, anybody who has been made redundant is under... Well, here's how it goes. If you don't do something about changing your visa conditions, you could next time around when you go to apply for anything, if you apply for anything, you could be accused of not being a compliant kind of a person. And then they can refuse a visa based on what we call the bona fides test. So, but these situations need very, very careful handling. So I'm not going to give out generic advice because in some situations it's best to just go and look for another job and then apply for a new visa if you can. But that might be very difficult in the current circumstances. So you need to think about other options. Other options would be applying for a visitor visa, or telling immigration that you have lost your job and seeking their, saying, can they note that on the file, but you'd like to wait and to see if there'd be any relaxations en masse for somebody like you. The other thing might be to consider, for example, going onto a student visa if you've got funds to do that. I do think there is a very big opportunity for people to stuck here on shore if they've got funds to go and try and do some upskilling. Perfect time for that. It's the one thing that's really viable right now. Starting courses in July. So we have got some people who are doing that. They're going from a working holiday visa to postgraduate studies, for example. Cheyenne asks, may I know if NZ entertain job seeker visa next year for skilled migrants? We don't have any answer on that. What Shyam's asking about is he's probably applied for residence based on having 160 points but no job offer, and if approved, or if confirmed as having the points and having the English, etc., the usual outcome is a 9-month job search visa. Well, my view is that if you've already applied, the instructions are still there to say that you should be given that visa, and therefore they would be bound to honour that unless they really made a dramatic step. But if you haven't applied already for residence and are planning to do so next year, you have to see what the policies are next year and whether they still allow people who don't have job offers to come to even bother applying. That would require a completely non-COVID related policy change. Fishbowl, hours were reduced to 24 a week. I agreed to use my annual leave to meet the 30 hours. My residency was lodged in January. Will the use of my leave be a problem? No, well, I don't anticipate that it should be, as long as it's not prolonged. I think if it's for a fixed period and then you can go back after you've used up your leave, you can go back up to your 30 hours without having to use up any leave, then I think you'll be okay. If you really need to get advice if this is going to be any kind of long-standing problem, and this is where immigration again has not given a complete steer at all on it. They haven't said, it's okay just to drop your hours back. We think there will be a 3-month tolerance, but we can't confirm that. Oh. Okay, so I thought that was an advert for a haircut, and I was thinking maybe I need one. Here on my visa as a plumber, made redundant in March. Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. We want to change to my wife, who is a hairdresser. Her visa currently depends on mine. Yeah. Oh gosh, I turn 56 soon. Have to change for residence later anyhow. Well, okay, so, a hairdresser is a mid-skilled role. If it can be proved after advertising that there's no hairdresser to do the job, then it's possible to make the switch, and you can both apply for other visas. And again, I guess it really does depend on the specifics of the labour market. Are there going to be people who can suddenly step into hairdressing roles just because they've been made redundant from a hotel or hospitality outlet? Possibly not. But with the labour market, as we always mantra in my office, you never know until you've seen the actual advertising and what the employer has done to try to find somebody. Of course, you as a plumber, if you can find another job, you can also apply for a variation of conditions. But look, again, these situations are way specific because they really do need very careful strategic advice. You need plan A and you need plan B. And your case makes me think of something that I didn't say earlier, but honestly, please, for anybody out there who's on temporary visas, who has a skerrick of a chance to apply for residence, it really is important to be getting that strategy to apply for residence. And maybe even if they suspend being able to apply for a period, you can use that period to get upskilled, to get the points you need to sit the English test. We've spent months researching qualifications that can be done online to get people 40 points, for example, if they're missing them. So that's a little bit off point of what you've asked, but nonetheless, I think it's relevant. What's the position of the student visa on the priority list? So actually, Mohammed, the good news there is that student visas are second priority, but they're going to deal with onshore students before they deal with offshore, because there's not much point dealing with offshore until the border is viable. So they'll prioritize those who are onshore first, and they will want to make sure that they'll do that with gusto because they want to get people starting in July. That's the next intake. But are they still accepting applications for students? Yes, they are. And unless otherwise advised, I would recommend making plans to go ahead and apply. If you were to get processed and you had to defer actually coming into New Zealand and starting on a course till next February, that's possible. So I don't see a problem with that. Gustav, gosh, so many. Okay, here we go. If we have pending residency and I lose my job, then get a new job, would I need to update the new employer details or resubmit? Really good question, Gustav. And the answer to that is you can swap out one job for another. And in fact, you're under an obligation to tell immigration that you've lost job A, and then you supply all the details of job B and with all the full paperwork, but you don't have to reapply and repay. You are absolutely allowed to swap out as many times while the application is still alive. That's some good news. That's some happy news, and we do it a lot. We do it. We do it even in the normal thing. Oh, Maya, hi, Maya. PR's way down the priority list, I'm afraid, way down. Third, we all sort of. I mean, I've been quite simplistic because we've got 4 tiers, but then there's all these sub tiers. You are almost at the bottom of the third priorities. Okay, so sorry, but given that you can't travel out anyway, there's no harm done because you've got your residence and you're just waiting for your PR. So I hope that makes you feel a bit better. I do know you're anxious about that. Julia says, are essentials work visas going to be cancelled next year? If cancelled, what work visas can be applied for? Okay, Julia, look, nobody knows what the future post-COVID, well, when I say post-COVID, I suppose COVID's an ongoing scenario. But look, what I'm saying is that there's COVID in the sense that there's all these immediate concerns around border and, what visas can and can't be processed. But to actually say, right, we're going to do away completely with essential skills work visas, that's beyond the scope of this bill. They could say for a while, we are not going to accept essential skill work visas for a particular category of people. I mean, they can do it by nationality, they can do it by class. But do I think they're going to do away with essential skills work visas altogether? No, I don't. And the reason I don't think so is because New Zealand will always continue to need certain workers. It will just come back down to the premise that there has to be a genuine shortage of someone here to do that job. And that's going to be applied very, very strictly. So no, my money's on it still. We will still have essential skills work visas. As far as I understand, if the residency application was submitted pre-COVID, my application would not be impacted as much, except for major delays. Is that a fair interpretation? That is a fair interpretation. If, I don't know what category you've applied under, but let's assume it's based on a job. As long as your job is continuing, yes, it's just about delays. Yep. So good news there. Barney. New job offer, fair busy with variation. Offer still valid. Will INZ process my application? I'm glad you've asked about variations because, okay, will INZ. So was busy with variation of conditions. I suppose there's a missing link there for me. Did you actually apply for your variation or were you just getting ready to apply? And I actually need to know a bit more about your job to give you a good answer because, okay, wow, it's so late, but okay. There's a new variation of conditions process, which they've brought online. It's very limited, but that's strictly for essential workers. And as we know, there's different interpretations of essential worker, but if you're an essential worker, you could potentially be applying online, but I possibly wouldn't recommend that. I actually don't like the new policy on variations. If you hang on a bit, if you've already lodged your variation, it will just be in that pile waiting to be done, and it will depend on the type of work as to what priority it gets. If you haven't applied at all and you don't fit the new online, you're going to have to submit a variation now, and again, it could take some time. I suggest you flick me an email, and I can give you a bit more advice on that if need be. Okay, where am I now? Ooh. What's this one? Nazreen. Don't think I've answered this one. Husband is in NZ on a work to residence. I applied for visitor visa in Jan, but COVID in Beijing delayed. My visa application was sent to NZ, wondering will it be processed as it is a visitor application. I think you will find that you're in for a delay. If you've applied for a visitor visa and it went to Beijing, that suggests to me that it wasn't done under partnership, it was done under general. Because if you'd done it under partnership, it would have gone to Hamilton. And therefore, I think you're going to be, yeah, you're going to be waiting a long time. I'm sorry, Nazreen, but that's the reality. And if I've got those facts wrong, then you need to let me know. Ty, hi Ty. Oh, hospitality. Gosh, poor old hospitality. Really, Ty, I mean that, hospitality. We've all loved our coffees and our lattes and our this and our that and our meals, and we love having cafes and restaurants, and we feel so much for you at this time. We know that you're really badly hit, and I think the fact is that, okay, what do I think about hospitality? I do a lot of hospitality work myself, and I think that, of course, there will be pockets of possibilities for people, even in this awful time, because, there are some places that are really remote in New Zealand, for example, or that may need a particular kind of chef. And just because people, again, have been made redundant doesn't necessarily mean that those people are around. But for the most part, people who are duty managers or frontline wait staff, of course, the government's not going to tolerate that non-New Zealanders get those jobs when they could and should be filled by New Zealanders. So some of what I think is going to happen in the next period, Ty, is that people need to get good advice that doesn't lead them astray into thinking that there are possibilities where there are not. It will be case by case, and some of our job is going to be helping people manage their expectations and start planning about how they're going to get out of New Zealand, because it may be that there aren't jobs to justify visas. I am married to a Kiwi, 32 years, living outside New Zealand. He would like to go back. I'm applying for partnership residence. Is this correct visa? I don't have enough information. To apply for residence through partnership, you must prove that you have been living in a genuine and stable relationship for at least 12 months. You have to have an eligible New Zealand partner, and there are some little twizzles around that. But if you have been living together offshore, yes, you can apply for 12 more months with an eligible partner. You could apply for your residence. Yeah, that could well be the visa to apply for. And you may find, though, that if you are really established, this is an interesting one, and you could contact me, because if you want to travel back, you may actually be able to get through the border closure, because there are some possibilities to get exceptions for people who really have very clear-cut relationships. I just did one myself, and that family they've just finished their quarantine. So don't know, worth maybe getting some advice around. Yanika says, we've approved visas but stuck in South Africa. My heart felt everything for you. Entry dates approaching quickly. Any advice? It will be our first entry to a new home. Yeah, so I mean, this is this area where it's just really difficult. I know that you've made a commitment to New Zealand. You've probably been planning for months, paid lots of money, possibly to agents, certainly to immigration, to doctors, to this, to that, possibly resigned jobs. This is where one has to hope that as long as the job is secure still, that the government may have it in their heart to extend your first entry dates so that you can still come in at a later date. But do I think you'll get through the border closure? Not unless you are in essential, like critical essential work. So, sorry. Our ITA documents arrived at INZ day before lockdown, not yet processed or payment taken. Well, Byron, yeah, don't worry about that. They will date stamp it from the day it got signed for at the courier depot, so we're told. We've got lots of applications like that. You just got to be patient, and the validity of the police clearance ought to be honoured. Harpreet, one more question. I was about to file for EOI for SMC. Can I do so? No, you can do so. We are filing. It's just that they're not going to possibly pull you out of the pool. But yeah, you can go ahead and they'll still take your money and you can put it in. And, I'm a big one at the moment for thinking that yes, it's still a good, if you've got your eligibility, get that thing in. When they fire up again, then there's a chance at least of being able to be pulled out of the pool. Constantina, kia ora, Katie. Is there any information when INZ will start processing already approved residency class visas? Oh, yes. Well, okay, I think this is one of those ones where they'll be really happy to sign off and clear out some decks if you get in touch with your residence case officer. But the only ones that wouldn't be approved, of course, if they were dependent on a job and that job's fallen away, or if the hours have fallen away, or the pay has fallen away and they want to reopen that. But if everything is still as it was, and I've got some of those of my own where I will be going back straight away to the case officer once I know they're back working, and I will get them to try and get them to sign off as quickly as possible. If I were a case officer, I'd be delighted to get that off my desk. Hendrik. Right, husband is on essential skills, lost his job, last day of work, 9th April. On open work visa, partner of work, am I allowed to work? Okay, so thank you, Hendrik. That's really good of you to come forward like that on that. You really are not supposed to carry on the visas that you've got, because the purpose in our Immigration Act, it talks about if you are no longer fulfilling the purpose of your visa, you can be liable for deportation. And although they're not going to act and they won't know anything, next time you go to do anything, they look back at your history also and see whether you've been a compliant soul. My advice would be to try to make a switch. And if you want, obviously, you know, it all does depend. Maybe if you've actually got a job, the question I have is it something where you could justify applying for the visa yourself as the main applicant based on the job? But don't just sit on that. It can, unless you never want to come back to New Zealand ever again, I would do something about it. My wife is a healthcare worker. Yay! Applied for residency in January. I applied GVV. Right. Okay, so you're obviously offshore, and you have, okay, so she applied for residency. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I guess GVVs, I think, are really far down there at their queue, because they would say, well, you're only applying for GVV when you don't have an established partnership, and therefore you're low priority and you're not going to get through the border. So yours could take quite some time. So that's a situation where I'd say keep making sure you've got good evidence to justify why you should even be given a GVV, but don't expect any movement fast. Thomas applied for residence. Okay. Right, Thomas, thank you, because you're actually one where something I said earlier would actually come into play properly. So talent accredited, you would have absolutely got your first work to residence under the old pay rate of $26.45 an hour. You are allowed to renew on that same pay rate, even though the rate's gone up since. So what you would do is you would juggle and wait until probably a month before your work visas expire and see whether or not there's been any movement at all in residence, but expect to probably have to apply. But you do have time right up until the end to apply, because that will trigger new interim visas with the same working rights, and then you will stay lawful. But I have seen quite a lot of people not renew their temporary visas, thinking that just applying for residence spares them, and it doesn't. So please make sure you do something before September. And they keep coming. Oh no, sorry, that's that one. Hang on, I'm going. Oh my gosh. I don't know if anyone's still here. I think I may have done them all. And I suspect I'm probably on my own by now. Is anybody still with me? No idea. I am just scanning to see if there is anything at all I may have still missed. Oh. Wow. Oh, Claire. Hi, Claire. Gosh, hello. Thank you, Claire. Oh, here's one I didn't answer. Bruce. Blast from the past. Changing employer, had an application for variation but turned down, not knowing the real reason while getting a new visa. Honestly, Bruce, if Bruce, you're still there, I don't know, because I just would have to know the facts. I'm sorry. We have to know why something has been declined. If they declined a variation, there absolutely should have been reasons given. So yeah, that's just not an answer I can give like this. Still scanning. I think this is one I didn't answer. Barney, if you're still there. Variation of conditions about to be lodged, then lockdown. Will be lodged now. Offer is still valid. Implications. Implications could be that they could ask you why you didn't do anything earlier, but I think they would be lenient on you because you couldn't physically apply for a variation until now. As for whether you're going to get a variation now, I would have to know again whether it meets the conditions. There's actually some quite tight conditions around variations of conditions around, whether it's the same occupation, whether it's in the same region, etc., etc. So it really depends on what the visa is that you were trying to vary. Sorry, can't answer. Penny, crumbs. Work to residence. I'm essential skilled worker. I know. Yeah, Penny. As long as they don't suspend your right to apply, you can apply. Of course, you can. And as soon as you hit that the time period when you can apply, I would absolutely apply. And if they do suspend, then you need to be at the ready to apply as soon as you possibly can after they lift any suspension. Here's another one. Came to New Zealand, 6-month visitor, looks unified. Oh, okay, yep. Okay, so will I be able to apply for another extension? So under ordinary visitor visa rules, you're allowed 9 months pretty much, and then that's it. And they would expect you to leave. Anything else would have to be kind of treated as an exception to instructions. And the answer is you'd have to advocate for yourself as to why you need that. And they may not be that keen. And plus, you have to have funds. So the longer you stay, I'm assuming the more funds you're going to have. But yeah, it does come down to individual circumstances, I'm afraid, so we'd have to know a bit more. And there it is. The answer there is yes. It is possible to courier an application. Absolutely. We've been couriering applications actually through, even in level 4, people were couriering applications. You should courier it. Don't delay, because they could suspend. Okay, my dears, I'm going to finish up. Thank you so much. This is my first ever live on YouTube, so it's a new experience. It should never have really gone so long, but I didn't anticipate having so many questions. Anyway, happy to keep posting information. I will do some more lives. I'll promise to try to keep them shorter. And over and out. And stay well, everybody. Please, if you are in any kind of stress or distress, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you.